Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Repeateron, and today we're going to be doing another tier list. This is a Dead by Daylight tier list. We're going to be taking a look at all of the killer perks, and I'm going to be ranking them based on how good that I think that they are. I have gotten a chance to use all of these now, so, and this is all the way up to Pinhead, so I know what his perks do, and I've actually been using him quite a lot. He is a very fun killer, so let's just begin. Our first one, we're going to be going down in alphabetical order, and first up we have a Nurse's Calling. A Nurse's Calling makes it so that you can see the auras of survivors that are healing or being healed within up to 28 meters, 20 to 28 depending on the level. This one can be really good. It depends on which killer you have. If the killer has a small tear radius, this one can actually be excellent. This one can be quite good on Nurse, can be good on like Michael. It can be good on quite a few of the killers, and I don't think it's ever going to really be a bad perk to have on any of them. Less than ideal on some though. If you have a large tear radius, or if you want to make your tear radius larger, it's not going to help you as much because people will probably stop trying to heal then, just because it's not as safe, unless they're at a very safe loop or something like that. So overall, it still gives you information, still tells you where people are and what people are doing, how many people are there, and if you're interrupting people healing, that's always the best, especially if you can interrupt multiple people that are injured healing, because that means that somebody isn't going to be able to get healed, and you can likely get to a hook very easily. I'd put Nurse's Calling probably up into B tier. Next up we have Agitation. This is a Trapper perk, and this makes it so when you're carrying a survivor, you have an increased movement speed while carrying them, between 6 and 18% depending on level. You also increase your tear radius by 12 meters. Increasing the tear radius might help depending on what build you're running, but mostly this is for the movement speed, and the movement speed is pretty nice. Even with that 18% faster movement speed, you still cannot catch up to a survivor if you both are running just in a straight direction. There's nothing in the way. But it does allow you to get some sneaky hits in. The main thing that this gives you an advantage with is that you get to pick whatever hook you want to go to. You could combine this with Iron Grasps too, and then you could pretty much take anybody wherever the heck you want. That's what's a common strategy that not very good killers use to get to the basement. To try to camp the basement. That's not really a strategy you want to be using though as a killer, because well, first off, I find it very boring, but on top of that, it just doesn't really help you actually win or get any sort of wins. It just helps you camp somebody to death. This one can be really good on certain killers, any killer that doesn't move incredibly fast. So any of the slower killers can make pretty good use of this, like Deathslinger. It can work really well on Trickster. It can work pretty well on anybody that also wants to set up like Trapper, and Hag. Both those two make very good use of this because you can take somebody from where they're relatively safe and move them to an area where you have traps set up. That way survivors have to come into your area that you have traps. So this one's another pretty good perk. I would probably put this one also into B tier. I'd put it lower than Nurse's Calling. Then we have Bamboozle. Bamboozle makes it so when you jump through when you vault through a window, that blocks the window for up to 16 seconds. So nobody can use that. This can only trigger once every, I believe it's 16 seconds or so, and it can't trigger on multiple windows, only one. You do get a little bit faster vaulting speed with this too. This one can be really useful on certain killers like Hillbilly or on the Cannibal. Either one of those that don't necessarily like playing around windows, or windows are their biggest weakness. This can be really strong for them. You can also play this on Michael, and then you vault through windows incredibly fast and are extremely scary then coming through it. On other killers, you're never going to use this. Like, you're never going to use it on Nurse. You're probably never going to use it on really any killers that don't have a problem with windows. So like Demo, you're probably not going to use this on or anything. It's pretty useful on everybody. I'd probably put this one into C tier. On certain killers, it's certainly better. On other killers, it's just kind of okay. Then we have BBQ Chili. BBQ Chili is arguably one of the best perks in the game, but not necessarily because it does something, well, it does do something incredibly useful, but it doesn't do it in a way that you're winning from it. Well, sort of. This makes it so when you hook a survivor, you can then see the auras of all survivors away from you for the next 4 seconds, so long as they are 40 meters or further away and they're not hiding in something like a locker. If they're hiding in a locker, or if they have a perk like Distortion, you don't get to see them, assuming Distortion still has charges. But further than 40 meters away, you can see people, so if you're not seeing people, that means you know that people are close or they're hiding. And if you can see people, then you can know what to do after you hook somebody, which is always awesome. This also breaks the level cap, or I guess breaks the blood point cap that you can get per level. Each person that you hook gives you an additional 25% more overall blood points that you can earn. So if you do really well in a match and you hook all 4 people, then you will get 100% bonus blood points. So you just get even more blood points, which that is arguably one of the best things because it lets you level up faster. You can use this to level up either the killers or the survivors perks very quickly. That's what I do with it. And besides that, the information that it gives you is actually pretty good. I like this one quite a lot. I would put this one up into A tier, not S tier, unless you're just saying, you know, do you want to level up things faster? In which case, then yeah, this is definitely S tier. But in terms of a perk by itself, information is good. And the extra blood points are just kind of like the cherry on top. So, very nice. So up next we have Beast of Prey. And what Beast of Prey does is makes it so once you activate Bloodlust, or once Bloodlust gets activated, Bloodlust will activate once you're chasing somebody for so long, then it will activate. Then you get the undetectable status. So then survivors can no longer hear your heartbeats, or I guess they can't hear the heartbeat anymore, nor can they see your red stain anymore. And then you also get extra blood points in the hunter category. Now, this does not get you a break on the cap of points like BBQ and Chili did. This just makes it so it increases them faster. Getting the undetectable status while Bloodlust is activated is not really all that useful because likely if you have Bloodlust activated, you can just run up and hit somebody. You'll have enough movement speed around most loops to catch up and hit somebody. So at that point, undetectable status doesn't matter that much, and you're likely not going to be able to use mind games from it as easily. So it's not really all that useful. I pretty much never use this one. When I have used it, it's felt rather underwhelming and unnecessary. So if you want to get those points early on, maybe this is a perk for you, but other than that, I'd put it into D tier. It's not good. Then we have Bitter Murmur. Bitter Murmur makes it so every time a generator is completed, you get to see the auras of all survivors within 16 meters of that generator for the next 5 seconds. Also, when all generators are completed at the end of the match, then you get to see everybody's aura for up to 10 seconds. This one's pretty good. This one's a neutral perk, so everybody gets access to it, and it gives you a lot of information. I'd probably put this one up into B tier. It's pretty straightforward, but pretty nice to have. Then we have Blood Echo. Blood Echo makes it so when you hook a survivor, all other injured survivors are now affected by the hemorrhage status effect until they're healed, and they also have the exhausted status effect for 45 seconds. This then goes on a cooldown of 60 seconds. This one is honestly not really that great. People have to be injured when you're hooking somebody else. That's not a guarantee. When they are injured, it does make them exhausted. The hemorrhage status doesn't really matter all that much. It just makes it so they bleed a little bit more. You should be able to find people even without just looking for their blood. You know, if there's a little bit more blood, it's not going to make a huge difference. And the exhausted status effect is kind of nice because that means they can't use exhaustion perks like Sprint Burst, like Dead Hard for 45 seconds. And if they get healed, then they can use those again. Unless it's Dead Hard, then they have to get hit again. So if somebody's already healing, it doesn't really matter. If people aren't injured, this doesn't really matter. This also goes on a cooldown for 60 seconds after you use it, which it may only affect one person. If they get healed right away, you're going to have to wait at least another minute to use Blood Echo again. It's pretty underwhelming, and I'd put this one into D tier. Blood Warden makes it so as soon as one of the exit gates has been opened, Blood Warden becomes active. You get to see the auras of all survivors standing inside the exit gate area, as well as then if you hook someone, the entity will then block the exit gate for 60 seconds. This can be a super fun perk to run. It's very entertaining when it does work and when it works on multiple people, but it's not that consistent. It's not a great perk. It's not a great perk that you want to rely on, really. It's just more for messing around, and sometimes it works. Sometimes you get, some funny moments, or sometimes you actually end up killing the whole team because they didn't realize what you were doing, or if you had this. But other than that, as a perk for winning, it doesn't really help all that much. I'd probably put this one in high D tier. Then we have Bloodhound. Bloodhound makes it so that you can see blood on the ground much more vividly. It has a brighter vibrance to it, as well as the blood will last longer than it normally does for up to 4 seconds. That can be kind of useful. I actually do kind of like running Bloodhound. It makes spotting blood very easy, and I've heard if you have slight color blindness or color impairment of some sort, this can help so that you can actually spot the blood a little bit easier, because in certain maps where they're darker, it's very difficult to actually see the blood. This lets you see them a little bit more vibrantly, but this doesn't really help all that much. It's just kind of a cool addition to your perks, but it doesn't really give you all that much more information. So I'd also put this one probably into D tier. Next, we got Brutal Strength, and Brutal Strength makes it so that you kick everything faster. Up to 20% faster, so you kick breakable walls, breakable pallets, and I should just say pallets because all pallets are breakable, and generators a little bit quicker. This one's really good. It's never going to be a bad thing on anybody. I'd put this one up into B tier as well. Then we have Corrupt Intervention. Corrupt Intervention makes it so at the very start of the match, 3 of the furthest generators away from you are blocked for the next 2 minutes, or up to 2 minutes. This can be really good. This can be really strong on certain killers, especially on killers like Michael, who need time to set up. It's really good on Trapper and Hag, who need time to set up. It can also be really good on killers that don't necessarily need time to set up, but it corrals the survivors closer to you, because the survivors have to get closer to you to get to the generators that they need to get done. If they're not doing that, and if they're just waiting out Corrupt Intervention, there's more chance that somebody's going to be found and potentially go down before Corrupt Intervention goes away. So it forces survivors to actually come to you. It forces survivors to go do potentially side objectives like cleansing totems, opening chests, things like that. So it might be easier to spot them out in the open and potentially start a chase with them, start trying to kill them. Very good. I don't really have anything bad to say about Corrupt Intervention. I'd probably put it up into S tier. It's a super nice perk to have on almost every killer, really. Next, we have Chlorophobia. This one makes it so the healing speed of all survivors within your terror radius is reduced by up to 50%. This one by itself honestly isn't way great, because it only becomes really useful on small maps. If you're in any sort of large map, your terror radius doesn't really matter all that much. So if you send yourself to a small map, and especially if you make your terror radius larger, it can be pretty good. It's also not that great on a lot of the killers that have smaller terror radius, so you're never going to see this on like Deathslinger or Michael or anybody like that. So it's limited to the killers and it's limited to the maps. It's just not a super useful perk. I'd probably put this one into high D tier as well. Then we have Coup de Grace. This makes it so every time a generator is completed, you get 1 token. You then consume one of these tokens whenever you do a lunge attack, and your lunge attack is further than it normally would be by up to 60%. This one can actually be super fun because you can hit survivors from a surprising distance that they wouldn't ever expect you to. You can also use it to sometimes get around objects a little bit easier than you normally would. Like if part of the floor is broken in a particular map, you might be able to actually lunge attack kind of around that hole to hit someone. It's super fun to actually use, but it's pretty unremarkable, I'd say, because you only get 1 token every time a generator is done, which means at best you're getting 1 free auto attack on somebody at some point, and that's not really great for a perk. It's an exchange for they get 1 objective done, you get 1 hit in, which isn't giving you necessarily a hook. So I'd put Coup de Grace probably also into D tier. Has some uses, but not very many. Next we got Cruel Limits. Cruel Limits makes it so whenever a generator is completed, all the windows and vaulting locations within 32 meters of that generator are blocked for all survivors for the next 30 seconds. This might sound good, or at least decent, but honestly it's not really all that great unless you were already on top of the generator pretty much when it got done. Outside of that, the survivors are likely not going to be hanging around there, and if they are, they're probably hiding or healing up somewhere where you're probably not going to go out of your way to try to get them, because it's just going to take so much time and effort to actually find these people, and it might just not be worth it. You might find the one guy that you haven't hooked at all or something like that, where it would have just been better to go and patrol the other generators. So this one is really underwhelming when it's actually used. It sounds kind of good in practice, or it sounds kind of good on paper, it's just not very good in practice. So I'd probably put this one into D tier as well. Up next we have Dark Devotion. Dark Devotion makes it so when you hit the Obsession with a basic attack, then you transfer your terror radius to them for the next 30 seconds. You also then are granted the Undetectable status effect. So this one can actually be a lot of fun to use, and it can actually be really strong too, especially if you're playing with not a coordinated team. Because, or I guess against a coordinated team, if you hit someone, then they are injured and they will be carrying your terror radius around, causing other survivors that either don't see just them probable paranoia. So they don't know if the killer's around them, if the killer's being chased by them. Even in a somewhat competent group that's like communicating with one another, this can still cause paranoia and can still cause problems. As well as you getting the Undetectable status effect is pretty good, because that means you can likely go somewhere else and hit somebody else. I like Dark Devotion. I would probably put this one... I'd probably put this one into B tier as well. Maybe. I'll put it into like C tier, because there are some instances where it doesn't really matter, and on certain killers you don't really care. Especially if you have a small terror radius, then it usually doesn't matter all that much. Next we have Deadlock. This makes it so when a generator is completed, then the next generator with the next most progression gets blocked by the entity for 30 seconds, and it's also revealed to you in white, so you know which generator it is. This one can be pretty good. This one's a good amount of slowdown, because it's 30 seconds where nobody can touch that generator, and if that generator was at 99, and especially if you have something like Ruin up, then that generator's pretty much going to regress back to nothing. So that is really useful. It prevents multiple gens popping one right after another, unless everybody's just split up and everybody's really working on gens, in which case then this isn't going to help as much, but it should help in most circumstances. So I'd put Deadlock probably up into B tier. It can be pretty useful. Next is Deadman Switch. Deadman Switch makes it so that you become obsessed with one of the survivors, and now there's an obsession in every game, so nobody will know what perks you're actually running. Anyway, this makes it so after hooking the obsession, Deadman Switch becomes activated. And while a survivor is repairing a generator and then stops repairing a generator, then the entity will block that generator for the next 45 seconds. That generator is also highlighted in a white aura. This one is kind of like Deadlock, but far more restrictive, because this one you have to be actively hooking the obsession, as well as then somebody has to get off of the generator, and there can't be multiple people working on the same generator, because if there are, then it has to wait for everybody to hop off it for it to block it. So this one can be sort of useful, but largely isn't all that useful a lot of the time. I'd probably put this one into C tier on the low end, where it has some use, but it's not as useful as like Deadlock is. Deathbound makes it so when a survivor heals another survivor the equivalent of one health state that's at least 32 meters away from you, then the survivor's location will be revealed, and for the next 60 seconds, that survivor will then have the Oblivious status effect when they are further than 8 meters away from the healed survivor. This one's a really weird one. It has so many prerequisites to actually meet that it usually doesn't help all that much. Now, having a survivor with the Oblivious status effect for 60 seconds is pretty good, because that's pretty much the same as you being undetectable, just for that single person. So they won't know exactly where you are, they can't hear you, they can't see your red stain, unless they actually like physically see you, look at you and everything. So Deathbound can be useful for that, but it's only for 60 seconds, and it's only so long as those people are split up from one another. If they're together, then this doesn't do anything, and you have to be so far away for it to activate. It's so many steps that it's just usually not worth taking. I'd put this one into D tier. Up next, we have Deerstalker. Deerstalker makes it so that you can see the auras of all downed survivors, so long as you're within 36 meters of them. That's it, and this one can be useful. It can be pretty good on killers that like to slug. So people like Oni, it can be useful on. It can be useful on pretty much anybody, because anybody could potentially slug. Usually you don't go out of your way to do it. But if, you down somebody and then you see somebody right next to them that's also injured, usually you're going to go right after them and try to down them too. This lets you see that other person that you downed, so I'd probably put this one into C tier. It can be useful on certain killers. Next we have Discordance. Discordance makes it so any generator that's within up to 128 meters that has 2 survivors working on it will then give you an audio alert, as well as that generator will be highlighted in yellow. This can be pretty useful. You can actually have this activate multiple times, and this just tells you where to go. It's pretty nice to have, and I'd probably put Discordance up into A tier. It can be really good on certain killers. Anybody that wants to actively go and chase people, so like Billy, Bubba, I'm sorry, that would be the Hillbilly and Leatherface. Clown, it can be really useful on. On other killers, you're never going to use like Discordance, like Hag or Trapper or something like that, where it's just you don't care a lot of the time. You might get some value out of it on those killers, but not as much as other killers that actively want to chase. Then we've got Distressing. Distressing makes it so that your terror radius is increased by up to 26%, as well as you get 100% more blood points for the Deviousness category. This again isn't a break in the level cap, like how BBQ and Chili is. I keep saying level cap, but it's more like blood point cap. So this just lets you get more points. The larger terror radius can be useful on certain killers with other perks in small maps. For the most part, not all that useful, I would say. I'd probably put this one also into D tier. Then we've got Dragon's Grip. Dragon's Grip makes it so after kicking a generator for the next 30 seconds, the first survivor to interact with that will scream, and then they will be exposed for the next 60 seconds. And then this goes on a cooldown of 80 seconds. When they're exposed, that means they can be hit once and go down. That can be really useful, unless the survivor was already injured, in which case you didn't really get much out of this. It just went on cooldown, and you have to hope that somebody goes back to that generator within the next 30 seconds and touches it for this to activate, and then for you to find them within that 60 seconds. Again, it's a lot of prerequisites for you to actually get some use out of this, and it's kind of niche. I'd put this one up into C tier. Next up, we have Dying Light. Dying Light makes it so every time that you hook a survivor other than your obsession, you get 1 token. For each of these tokens that you get, this stacks a penalty debuff to all survivors that are not your obsession, but the reverse of that, an actual buff for the obsession. So you can have up to 11 tokens, which could be up to 33% more slowdown when it comes to repairing, healing, sabotaging, and breaking totems. But then the obsession is always granted with a permanent 33% increase action speed to unhooking and healing other survivors. This one sounds kind of good on paper because, you could potentially be hooking a bunch of people and then get a bunch of these tokens and slow everybody down except for your obsession. The main problem is you're giving your obsession a huge advantage with having a 33% increase in healing speed and unhooking speed. So if your obsession is running especially if your obsession is running a healing build, you just gave them probably the strongest build they could ever hope for, because they'll heal everybody up on their team and they'll be able to do a lot of things faster than pretty much everybody else. So the slowdown really can backfire on this one, and usually it does. There's not a whole lot of instances where Dying Light is going to help you a whole lot. I would put this one into D tier. It's probably the worst slowdown perk in the game. Next up, we have Enduring. This makes it so pallet stuns are less effective towards you, up to 50%. So you recover 50% faster from pallet stuns. This one's awesome. I really love Enduring. It's so good on so many killers because a lot of the time I just don't bother respecting the pallet at all. I just go right through it. And if I have Enduring, there's even less of a reason to respect the pallet. When you get to a pallet with a survivor, if they hit you with it, doesn't matter. You recover in like half a second. So then you just keep chasing them. Or you break the pallet, especially if you combine this with like brutal strength, where it's just you get hit, you break the pallet, you keep moving after them. You can do that for pretty much every killer, and it works fairly well. As well as if the survivor drops the pallet on your head, and then you get stunned, and the survivor tries to jump over the pallet and back over to where you are, more or less just to kind of show off. With Enduring, you can't do that, because as soon as you get hit, the survivor is pretty much already right to you once you've recovered. So you just turn to the side and hit them, or turn around and hit them. And there's nothing that they can really do at that point. You can actually get some really nice hits with this. You can actually get downs with this incredibly easy if survivors don't know that you have it, or just don't understand what it does, where you might hit them, they drop the pallet, and then try to jump through it, and then you just hit them again, and they went down super quick. So Enduring, really good. I really like it. I'd put this one up into B tier. I wouldn't say it's ever going to be like a super overpowered perk on anybody, but it's always going to be useful on every killer. So I think it's right there. Next up, we have Eruption. This makes it so after kicking a generator, its aura is highlighted in yellow. When a survivor is put into a dying state, every affected generator explodes and starts regressing, removing the highlighted aura. This applies a 6% regression penalty, and any survivor repairing generators when it explodes will scream and suffer the incapacitated status effect for the next 16 seconds. This then goes on a cooldown for 30 seconds. This one can be useful. I think it would be most useful on a character like Legion, where you can run around, constantly be hitting people and then kicking gens. For other killers, it's just kind of okay, I would say. I'd probably put this one into high C tier, maybe low B tier. It can be pretty useful at times. Next, we have Fired Up. Fired Up makes it so every time a generator is completed, you gain a stackable token that increases by up to 4%, where you can break pallets, break walls, damage generators, and vault windows a little bit faster, up to 20%. Fired Up is okay. You get everything done a little bit quicker, but it's at the cost of your opposition getting objectives done. You obviously want Fired Up to be as strong as possible, but if it's as strong as possible, then that means survivors are getting a lot of stuff done, which may or may not mean that you're winning or losing. So I'd probably put Fired Up somewhere into like C tier. Next, we have Forced Penance. This makes it so when a survivor takes a protection hit, this is like a hit for somebody else, then they suffer from the broken status effect for up to 80 seconds. This one can be really good with Legion too. I actually really like running it with him because it's very easy to get people to take protection hits, and you can have a bunch of broken status affected people, and the broken status effect makes it so that they cannot heal. Can be pretty useful, but also not really one of the greatest perks either, I'd say. I'd also probably put this one into like C tier. Up next we have Franklin's Demise. This makes it so when you hit somebody and they're holding an item, they will drop that item. And if that item is not recovered within the next 90 seconds, at least at the highest, then the entity will completely get rid of all the charges from that item. So the item will still remain, I believe, and if the person then takes it out of the trial, they can still use it and it'll be normal and everything like that. But if you were to knock like a med kit out of somebody's hand and then them come and pick it up later, some of those charges might have already been gone, so they can't use the medkit as effectively. You can also see the auras of all the items that you've knocked out of people's hands so long as you're within 32 meters of them. This can be pretty useful too. Franklin's Demise is never going to really be a bad thing because you could take it, and if the whole enemy team is running strong medkits or something, you can just wear them down little bit by little bit. And a lot of times survivors will try to come back and get their lost items, which can prove to be kind of useful for you, as well as if you notice items being missing and they were just there a second ago, then somebody just came and got it and they're nearby. So it gives you some information and it can be good. I'd probably put this one up into C tier. Next we have Fervent Chase. Fervent Chase makes it so every time you hook the obsession, you gain 1 token up to 4. And then this makes it so when you're in chase, your terror radius is reduced by 4 meters. That's it. This is arguably one of the worst perks in the game. Doesn't really give you all that much. Who cares if your terror radius is slightly smaller when you're chasing somebody? D tier. Next we have Gearhead. Gearhead makes it so after hitting a survivor twice with basic attacks, Gearhead becomes active for the next 30 seconds. This makes it so every time a survivor hits a good skill check while repairing a generator, it will reveal that generator in yellow. That's also not all that great. There's steps to be taken for this, and it just gives you a little bit of information. So I'd put this one also into D tier. Also, if the survivors aren't getting a whole lot of skill checks, it doesn't really help you all that much. Then we've got Hangman's Trick. Hangman's Trick makes it so when you're carrying a survivor, you can see the auras of any survivor standing next to other hooks within 6 meters of that hook. This one's pretty awful too, because who cares if you can see somebody across the map standing next to a hook? It doesn't really help you. You're not going to be able to walk over there and get them or anything like that. The majority of the time, Hangman's Trick gives you information that doesn't matter, or that you can't act upon because you're already carrying somebody, which means you're likely going to be taking them to a hook anyway. At most, this is just going to show you if somebody nearby is going to be trying to sabotage a hook, so you can go to a different hook. But most of the time, you can actually just walk over there and see if that's happening, and then walk to another hook if it is. So, D tier. Alright, now we're moving on to the hexes. Our first hex is Hex Blood Favor. This makes it so after hitting a survivor with your basic attack, the entity will block all pallets within 16 meters for the next 15 seconds. And this goes on a cooldown for the next 40 seconds. This one can be kind of cool. I like it on certain killers, but for the most part, it's pretty underwhelming. It doesn't help you a whole lot. Survivors can run much further than 16 meters after you hit them a lot of the time. This does depend on which killer you're playing, but a lot of the time you can hit them and they can just run further away for those 16 meters and get to a safe place and then just use a different pallet. So it doesn't help you a lot of the time, but sometimes it can. I also wish it didn't have a cooldown on it. Maybe this shouldn't even be a hex. If it was just a regular perk and then it activated and then maybe had the cooldown on it, I think it'd be fine. I'd put this one in like the low end of C tier. Then we have Hex Crowd Control. This makes it so anytime that a survivor does a rushed action through a window, this will prompt the entity to block it for the next up to 20 seconds. This one is kind of like Bamboozle, but I would say worse, because Bamboozle isn't going to ever go away. You can keep using Bamboozle. This one's tied to a hex, and it's not all that great, I would say. It's okay, can get you some hits, but it's a low C tier perk, I'd say. I might even want to move Bamboozle up to B tier compared to these other ones. Bamboozle's better than most of these, I would say, in almost every situation, so Bamboozle get up into B tier. Then we have Hex Devour Hope. This makes it so every time that you hook somebody and then they are unhooked, so long as you're away from them by 24 meters, you get 1 token. The first 2 tokens you get 10 seconds after hooking a survivor. You gain up to 5% haste for the next 10 seconds, so you move slightly faster. At 3 tokens, survivors suffer permanently from the exposed status effect, so they can be 1 hit down just by basic attacks. And then at 5 tokens, and then you can kill the survivor by your own hand. So you can perform a Mori with this. This is tied to a hex though, so if it does get cleansed, then all of these things just go away from it. But Devour Hope can actually be really strong, and it's a pretty good perk on most killers, especially anybody lacking lethality. So people like Wraith, or Clown, Trapper, anybody like that, Hag. It's not as great on like Billy or Leatherface or somebody that can just insta-down people already. Still could be useful on them though. I'd put it up into A tier. Then we have Hex Haunted Grounds. This makes it so when this Hex is cleansed, then all the survivors on the enemy team suffer for 60 seconds of the exposed status effect, meaning that you can one-hit them. This one can be pretty useful, especially if you're running it with other hexes, and it can catch people off guard. Again, it's really good on killers that don't have high lethality. On killers that do, it's kind of redundant. You probably shouldn't run it. But on the killers that don't have it, it's quite strong. I would probably put this one up into, it's either high B tier or low A tier. I think high B tier. Next we have Huntress's Lullaby. This one makes it so every time that you hook somebody, then you get a token. These tokens stack up to do different effects, and survivors naturally suffer from aggression penalty more so when they fail skill checks. So with each token, this shortens the time between warning sounds of a skill check upcoming until at 5 tokens they are just completely disabled. So then you won't hear them and you have to act fast. This does make skill checks harder to actually hit, but this is tied to a hex totem, so if it gets cleansed then it doesn't do anything. And the bonuses that you get from this one are pretty underwhelming. They don't help you a whole lot, especially if you're going up against good survivors where they just don't care if they have any sound effects or anything like that. It's not going to help that much against them. I'd put this one in the low end of C tier, maybe into D tier. Then we've got Hex No One Escapes Death. This is probably the most hated Hex in the game. This makes it so once the exit gates are turned on, one of the dull totems left in the area becomes activated. And this increases the killer's movement speed by up to 4%, as well as everybody has the exposed status effect on them when you hit them. So again, it is a 1 down from that, although if survivors cleanse all totems in the area, there isn't just another totem that magically spawns, as well as if survivors find that totem that activates as soon as this one gets there and they cleanse it, then it doesn't do anything either. This one is often regarded as a perk that rewards not necessarily great killers, or killers that can't apply pressure effectively. And I kind of see that, but it is still really strong, so I'd probably put this one up into A tier. Next up, we've got Hex Plaything, and this is a bit of a different hex. This makes it so there isn't a hex totem right away, but when you hook somebody, then one of the dull totems becomes the hex. The survivor that is affected by this hex is then suffering from the oblivious status effect, meaning that they will not hear your terror radius, they won't see your red stain, and for the next 90 seconds, only they can be the one who cleanses their totem. This totem is revealed to them so long as they get close. At max, it's within 16 meters. I'd probably put this one into C tier though, because it doesn't always help. And if people are just finding their totems and cleansing them super fast, it doesn't matter all that much, as well as this can interfere with other totems. So if you're running something like Devour Hope with this, your Devour Hope might just get cleansed by accident. Next, we have Hex Retribution, which I actually really like Retribution. I think it's a really good perk. But this makes it so when a survivor cleanses a dull totem, then they suffer from the oblivious status effect for the next 45 seconds. As well as when this totem is cleansed, it reveals the auras of all survivors for the next 10 seconds. That can be really good. You can get a lot of info from this, and it's good if you're running it with other hexes. Oblivious status effect on people is really nice too. I'd put this one up into B tier. Next we got Hex Ruin. This is probably one of the strongest, if not the strongest perk in the game currently. This makes it so when a survivor is not working on a generator that they previously worked on, the generator will automatically start regressing by up to 200%. So it will break apart faster than it normally would. And this is put on a totem. So if the totem gets cleansed, then this stops working. This is the best regression in the game. And if you can keep Ruin up for a decent amount of time, you can get a lot of value out of it. And it gives you the most value out of any of the perks in terms of the slowdown that you get. So I'd put this one up into S tier as well. Next we have Hex the Third Seal. So this makes it so for the last 4 seconds after you hit somebody with your basic attack, this inflicts the blind status to them so they can't see where you are based on aura reading abilities. This one's pretty underwhelming, I would say, and only really works if survivors are completely running an information, or at least one survivor is running an information build so that they can constantly be calling out where the killer is. And since that doesn't really exist now, at least at like what it did before, you pretty much never see anybody running Hex Third Seal, as well as it just isn't a Hex really worth running, because if it does get cleansed, then it does nothing, and it almost does less than nothing a lot of the time. So I'd probably put this one into D tier. Next we have Hex Thrill of the Hunt. This just makes it so you get 1 token for each totem that is remaining in the training grounds once the game is over. This also makes it so survivors cleanse a little bit slower. By the end of the game, then you get more points than you normally would. Kind of useful for getting points, and it can be kind of useful for hiding what totems you're actually running. So it can be a little bit useful, but for the most part, it's just for extra points, and I'd probably put this one into D tier as well. Up next, we have Hex Undying. This makes it so that you can see the auras of all survivors standing within 4 meters of any of your dull totems. This reveals them, and it makes it so if a Hex totem were to be cleansed, then Ruin will pretty much move that totem somewhere else. But it can only move it once. It used to be able to move it pretty much infinitely, which made like Ruin Undying completely busted and really stupid to play against. Now it's not so much, and it's best when it's used with that, or with like Devour Hope, or even Haunted Grounds. And you also get information, so Undying is still pretty useful. I would put Undying up into A tier, although in combination with Ruin, it is definitely S tier. Next we have Hoarder. Hoarder makes it so that you can hear noises a little bit better when people are trying to search through chests. As well as Hoarder also spawns 2 additional chests per level. So this one can be kind of funny to use, but honestly it doesn't really give you much. It gives you very little information, and I'd put it into D tier. Then we have Hysteria. Hysteria makes it so when you put a healthy survivor into the injured state, then all injured survivors suffer from the Oblivious status effect for the next 30 seconds. And then this goes on a 30-second cooldown. This one, again, can be really good on killers that can injure multiple people very quickly. And having the Oblivious status effect is pretty much like having the Undetectable status effect. So this one can be pretty useful. I'd put this one into C tier because there's plenty of killers where this just won't help all that much. And plenty of situations where it's just not going to help at all because nobody else is injured, so you're not getting any real value out of it. Next, we have I'm All Ears. This makes it so if a survivor performs a rushed action within 48 meters of you for the next 6 seconds, then you get to see them pretty much everywhere. So you can see them through walls and stuff, and then this goes on a 40-second cooldown. This is really nice. I really like I'm All Ears. I think it's a really good perk to actually be using on most killers because it lets you know what survivors are trying to do and what kind of mind games they're trying to pull, and it can help you respond accordingly. It'd be nice if it was on a little bit of a shorter cooldown in terms of once it goes on cooldown, and it didn't always affect people that were far away from you that you're not trying to chase. But I'm All Ears can be super useful. I'd put this one up into A tier. Next we have Infectious Fright. Infectious Fright makes it so when a survivor is put into the dying state, that makes it so any survivors within your terror radius will scream, and you can see their locations for the next 6 seconds. This one's really good. I really like using it on a lot of killers. Any killer that can down people quick. This just lets you go from one to the next, to the next, to the next, especially if you're playing somebody like Oni. Use your power and just pretty much stack on top of people. I'd put Infectious Fright probably also up into A tier. It's really nice to have a lot of the time. Next we have Insidious. Insidious makes it so when you're standing still for 2 seconds, then you get the Undetectable status effect, but this goes away as soon as you start moving. This one can be kind of funny to use to get funny hits on people that just aren't paying that much attention, but the main way that Insidious is generally used is you put it on Leatherface, you put somebody in the basement, and then you just stand down there with the Insidious going, so nobody knows that you're there, so that way you can chainsaw people. It's pretty boring to use it as a camping perk. It's kind of fun to use it as a stealth perk against other survivors, but a lot of the time it really doesn't help you, so I'd probably put this one into D tier as well. Next we have Iron Grasp. This makes it so survivors can't struggle as easy from you, as well as it takes them a little bit longer to actually struggle out of your grasp. This one's kind of like Agitation, but I would say Agitation is much better because you get the movement speed bonus from it. Iron Grasp is a little bit annoying for the survivors, and it is kind of just in combination with this just to take people to the basement. At least that's pretty much the only reason I see people using it. But you could use it to get people to a better hook. Again, if you're playing like Trapper or Hag, somebody that likes to set up traps and stuff, it can be useful on them. A lot of the time it doesn't really get you that much because if you're playing a killer normally, you know which hook you're going to go to once you pick somebody up. And this isn't going to make it so you get there any better than you normally would, if that makes sense. So I'd put this one into D tier. Then we have Iron Maiden. Iron Maiden makes it so opening lockers is up to 50% faster, as well as any survivor exiting a locker is suffering from the exposed status for the next 30 seconds, and their location will be revealed to you for 4 seconds. This one did get better. It's not as bad as it once was, but I still only ever really see this being used on like huntress and sometimes trickster, just so that you can get your power back quicker. For everybody else, no, that's not true. I do see it on Wraith every once in a while, because there is another one of his add-ons that you can take that makes it so you do interactions like that a little bit faster. And it is kind of funny to see how quickly he can open up lockers, but for the most part, this doesn't help you a ton. I'd put it into C tier because it does help certain killers, but most killers not so much. Next up, there's Knockout. Knockout makes it so when you put a survivor into the dying state with a basic attack, their aura is not revealed to any other survivors further away than 16 meters for the next 15 seconds, and that survivor has a more limited field of view, as well as suffers from the blindness status effect and crawls 50% slower. This is pretty much just so people don't get away from you once you down them, and if you plan on going to try to slug other people, it can kind of help then, but a lot of the time it's pretty unnecessary. This can be kind of funny if you put it with Pig, with one of her add-ons, and put a trap on somebody's head once you knock them down, because then they can lay on the ground and nobody knows where they are for quite a while. It's incredibly annoying for the person you're doing this to, but it is sort of funny to watch. Knockout is probably like a low C tier perk, I'd say. Next, we have Lethal Pursuer. Lethal Pursuer makes it so at the very start of the trial, you can see the auras of all other survivors for the next 9 seconds. This is super useful. I really love this perk. I would put this one like high up into A tier, because even though it's very limited, you only get 9 seconds of value out of it at the start, it tells you immediately at the start of the game where to go and what to do. So you have a good idea of where people are and where they're going to be moving to. Next, we have Lightborn. This makes it so you're immune to any sort of stuns from flashlights, firecrackers, flashbangs, or the blast mines, as well as anybody trying to blind you. Their aura is revealed for 10 seconds. This one is the one that you throw on if you just see like 4 flashlights in a game and you don't want to really deal with it. Besides that, though, it doesn't really have much of a purpose. Maybe you'll get flashbanged every once in a while, maybe you get blast mined every once in a while, or maybe you'll get blinded every once in a while, and it's probably better to not immediately throw this on when you see just one person have a flashlight. Sure, if everybody's running a flashlight, it does make sense, but outside of that, not so much. This one's C tier. Next, we have Mad Grit. This makes it so each successful attack when carrying a survivor pauses the survivor's wiggle a little bit by 4 seconds. So if you miss your swing, it doesn't really matter, and if you do hit your swing, then survivors don't wiggle more from you. So this is kind of funny to use with like Agitation, because you can actually attack super fast while you're holding somebody, and it can be a little bit scary for the other survivors. But other than that, it's pretty much just for like the memes. I would put this one into D tier. Next up, we got Make Your Choice. This makes it so when you are 32 meters away or further away from a survivor that is unhooked, the person that unhooked them suffers from the exposed status effect for the next 60 seconds. Then this goes on cooldown for also 60 seconds. This can be really good on certain killers like Wraith. You just run across the map, somebody gets unhooked, you just run right back, you find the person that unhooked them, you just get a 1 down them. Really useful there, and I really like taking it on killers like that. Outside of other killers that move kind of slow though, like any killers that move kind of slow, you don't get that much advantage from Make Your Choice, and it also depends on the map. If the map is really small, you may not get to use it all that much. So I'd probably put this one into C tier as well. Next is Mindbreaker. Mindbreaker makes it so when a survivor is repairing a generator, they suffer from the exhausted status effect, and this lingers for 5 seconds after they get off that generator. So this just makes it so people can't sprint burst off a generator, can't dead hard shortly after being on a generator, can't use balance landing or anything like that. This one is a little bit useful, but a lot of people will realize that you haven't, so it doesn't help a lot of the time, and I'd probably put this one into D tier. Next, we have Monitor and Abuse. So what Monitor and Abuse does is increase your base terror radius by 8 meters, but whenever you're outside of a chase, then your terror radius is reduced by 16 meters, and your field of view is increased by up to 10 degrees. This can be really good on people that already have small terror radius, like Deathslinger or like Michael, where you pretty much don't have any sort of terror radius unless you're chasing somebody, in which case then you do. So you can get very close to people without them ever really noticing. and get in free hits that way. On other killers that already have a normal or a big tear radius, this one's not as good, so I would probably put this one up into B tier. It's good on certain killers. It's actually really good on certain killers, but just kind of okay on most of the killers overall, I'd say. Then we have Monstrous Shrine. Monstrous Shrine might be the worst perk in the game. What Monstrous Shrine does is for every person that you have hooked on the basement hook, you get slight bonuses, or they get slight minuses. So this makes it so hook progression is accelerated by 3, 6, or 9%, depending on how many people you have on the hooks. Unhooking difficulty is increased by 5, 10, or 15%, and self-unhooking is also increased by 3, 6, or 9%. This one really isn't that good. If people are in the basement, they're already in a bad situation on most maps, I would say. And if there's multiple people down in the basement, you've probably won at that point, so this doesn't really help you all that much. The chance of them unhooking themselves is already so low that lowering it even more seems kind of redundant. Killing them slightly faster might be a little bit useful, but not that much. Like I said, if you have 3 people or 2 people down in the basement, they're probably dead. Unless you're just willing to leave the basement entirely and go somewhere else. But if not, and you're just kind of hanging around the basement because you've trapped like 3 people down there, and you know, why would you leave at that point? This doesn't really help. So definitely D tier. Next we have Nemesis. Nemesis makes it so every time that a survivor blinds you or stuns you with a pallet, or with a locker, then that makes them your obsession. That survivor is also suffering from the Oblivious status effect for up to the next 60 seconds. You can also see their aura for the next 4 seconds after they stun you. This one isn't too bad because having the Oblivious status effect is nice, and if you're running this with like Enduring, it can be pretty good because you can then sneak up on people and hit them pretty efficiently. But outside of that, it's pretty underwhelming, I would say. This works more as like a combo perk to be used with other perks, and even then, it's pretty underwhelming. I'd put Nemesis into D tier. Next, we have No Way Out. This makes it so for each survivor that you've hooked, each different survivor that you've hooked, then this gets 1 token, up to 4 tokens, and this will block the exit gates from being opened up for 12 seconds, as well as an additional 12 seconds for each token that you have, up to 60 seconds. So you can block the exit gate for just over a minute from being done with this. This can be useful, but a lot of the time it doesn't help you a whole ton, so I'd put No Way Out into like C tier. Next we have Oppression. Oppression makes it so when you damage a generator, up to 3 other random generators will also begin regressing. This also triggers a difficult skill check when the generators start being repaired again, and then this goes on cooldown for 80 seconds. This is kind of like you're kicking 1 generator to kick up to 3. That can be useful, but with the long cooldown on it, you don't get to use it all that often, I'd say. I wish it had a shorter cooldown, so you might be able to use it a little bit more. Maybe if they just had a shorter cooldown, but just didn't give it the difficult skill check, I feel like that would probably be better. I'd put this one into C tier. Next we have Overcharge. Overcharger makes it so that once you've kicked a generator, that generator then has a difficult skill check put on it for the next survivor that starts interacting with it, and if they fail that skill check, then it starts regressing by a little bit more, up to 5%. Overcharge really doesn't help a lot of the time. You get some progress lost on it. It's almost like you got to kick a generator twice, but the second time you weren't there, and that's not always the best compared to some of these other slowdown perks like Ruin or Pop Goes the Weasel, which we'll get to in a little bit. So probably D tier, maybe C tier. And no, I'd put it in D tier. Next, we have Overwhelming Presence. This makes it so anybody inside of your terror radius suffers from the inefficiency of their items. So items deplete at a 100% faster rate than they normally would. So toolboxes, medkits, flashlights, all of that gets reduced by 100%, so you get half as many uses out of them. This can really be effective if the match goes on for a while, but a lot of the time it doesn't help out that much because it's only so long as they're using them within your terror radius. They're likely not going to be doing that if they're trying to heal themselves. They'll probably go somewhere else to do it. If they're working on a generator, you might not be there. Flashlights, it probably will affect the most, but even so. And then like keys, maybe it will affect because you're using specific add-ons. But Overwhelming Presence, I'd put into like the low end of C tier. Then we have Play With Your Food. Play With Your Food makes it so you become obsessed with one of the survivors. And every time you start a chase with that survivor and lose that chase, then you get 1 token, up to 3 tokens. These give you 5% bonus movement speed up to 15%, although once you perform a basic attack or a special attack, then one of these tokens is consumed. So you have to keep resetting this to get more movement speed, which could be fun to use, and if you're using other perks like Nemesis, you can get it going more often, you can move a little bit quicker. If you're using a killer that has insta-down perks like Billy or Leatherface, yeah, this can be pretty fun, but you could also potentially just miss or whiff your swings, and then you lose these. You could hit your swings by accident. There's just a lot of prerequisites for this one. I'd put it into D tier because I just don't use it that much, even though it does have some use and could be good in certain situations. Then we have Pop Goes the Weasel. This makes it so after you've hooked somebody, you can then go kick a generator within the next 45 seconds, and that generator will instantly lose 25% of its total progress. So this is really good. This slows down games very quickly. This is probably one of the best perks in the game, and I'd put it up into S tier too. It's really not uncommon to see people running both Ruin and Pop, because Ruin regresses things faster. You have Pop as a backup plan if that goes away. If you want to run a real tryhard build, you go Ruin, Undying, Pop, and then like Tinker or something. And if you're playing a really strong killer, you can keep monitoring generators and just keep letting them regress and regress and regress. And then once you've applied enough pressure, you can then just still use Pop to keep up that pressure. It can be really oppressive for pretty much everybody. Next is Predator. Predator makes it so that scratch marks that survivors leave behind stay longer and are tighter together, I guess. This one really doesn't help you a whole lot. You should be able to find scratch marks without too much issue if people are running around. This one doesn't help you a whole lot more. It's similar to Bloodhound. It might give you a slight advantage in some situations, but most of the time it's not going to give you really any sort of advantage. So I'd put this into D tier. Up next we got Rancor. Rancor makes it so every time a generator is completed, then your obsession gets to see your aura for the next 3 seconds, but you get to see the aura of all other survivors for 3 seconds. As well as once all the generators are completed, the obsession suffers from the exposed status effect, which means they can be one hit, as well as you can also then perform a Mori on them, which makes Rancor a very fun perk to use. It's super fun to use, but it's not necessarily all that great. It gives you a little bit of information, so I think I'd put it into C tier. Then we have Remember Me. Remember Me makes it so that you become obsessed with one of the survivors. Each time that you hit the obsession with a basic attack, you get 1 token, and then the exit gates take longer to open by 4 seconds base, as well as each token adds up to a maximum of 16 seconds on top of that. So if you're running around and beating up the obsession constantly, it'll take the survivors a very long time to actually escape with this, and that can be really funny, but it doesn't help you a whole lot of the time. I'd probably put this one also into C tier, where you get a little bit of an advantage from it, but not much. Save the best for last. This makes it so once you hit anybody that's not the obsession, you get 1 token. You can stack up to 8 tokens, and for every token that you have, you recover slightly faster from your basic attacks when you hit somebody, up to a maximum of 40%, and then every time that you hit the obsession, then you lose 2 of these tokens. This kind of trains you to not go after the obsession, and you can recover incredibly fast with this. It's really good on a lot of killers that have to hit people twice. So Trapper, Hag, Deathslinger, I really like it on. It can be really good on a lot of killers. I would put this one up into A tier. Next we have Scourge Hooks, Gift of Pain. This makes it so 4 random hooks inside of each match will be given the Scourge Hooks, where you can see their aura and it's displayed in white, and there's kind of some, I guess, vibrance and other weird stuff going around with the hook. You'll definitely see it. When you put somebody on the Scourged Hooks, then they suffer from the Hemorrhage status as well as the Mangle status effect. Both these status effects will be removed upon healing, but then the survivor will suffer from a 9% healing and repairing action speed penalty until they are injured again. So this is a slowdown perk, but it has extra steps to it. It can be a little bit useful, but it doesn't help all the time. If people play injured and they're running like Resilience or Spine Chill or anything else that gives them bonus speed to repairing and stuff, this is actually just kind of helping them at that point. And they will just sit there injured anyway, especially if they're running like Iron Will. So this only helps if they are healing, but it can be a little bit useful. So I'd put it into like C tier. Next we have Shadowborn. This just increases your field of view by up to 15 degrees. This can be good on any killer that likes to have extra vision. So like Ghostface, Michael, Billy, anybody like that just gets more of an advantage from seeing more stuff. Always going to be useful, and if you like that larger FOB, it's also really good. Every other killer you really don't need it on, so I'd put it into C tier. Then we have Sloppy Butcher. Sloppy Butcher makes it so anybody hit with a basic attack is inflicted with the Hemorrhage and Mangle status effect. They also bleed 100% more, so they are bleeding more. And this does make it so that it takes longer for them to heal. And Scourge, I should have said that the Gift of Pain, the Scourge Hooks, also does this. This can be kind of useful. It's never going to be a bad thing, and it's far easier to use than something like the Scourge Hooks, because you just have to hit somebody once with it. So I'd put this one up into B tier. It's pretty useful. Next we have Spice from the Shadows. This makes it so you will get an audio notification if a survivor disturbs a crow within 36 meters of you. Then this goes on cooldown for 5 seconds. This can be useful. You can find people through this. It's not one of the best ways to find people, but it is a decent way to find people, so I'd put it into C tier. Then we have Spirit Fury. Spirit Fury makes it so after breaking 2 pallets, the next time you are stunned by a pallet, the entity will instantly break that pallet. Now, if you run this with Enduring, that is really scary because you're pretty much guaranteed to get a free hit then. After you've broken those 2 pallets, you run, you just keep chasing somebody, they hit you with the pallet, you hit them, and you keep on the chase pretty much. It can be pretty intimidating for the survivor, and I like running it that way. I don't know where I'd put this, though. It's definitely not as good as Enduring, so I think I'd put it into, like, C tier. It still has use, but it's not as useful as Enduring is. Next, we have Starstruck. Starstruck makes it so when you're carrying a survivor, Starstruck becomes activated. Survivors suffer the exposed status effect while in your terror radius. This lingers for 30 seconds after leaving your terror radius. And then after hooking or dropping the survivor, Starstruck deactivates. The status effect persists for the next 30 seconds for any survivor inside your terror radius at that moment. This then goes on a 60-second cooldown. This can be incredibly strong in people like Nurse or Spirit or anybody that can move really quick. Deathslinger as well. For other killers that already insta-down, not so much. For other killers that don't move particularly quick, also not so much. Somebody like Clown running this, it's okay. But I'd probably put this one up into like B tier. It's pretty good. I like using it. Next we have Strider, which this one kind of got nerfed, and I don't really see the point of using it anymore. I didn't really use it before anyway, but this makes it so all survivors' grunts of pain are 50% louder, and their regular breathing is 25% louder, so you can potentially find them a little bit easier. But the way that sound works in Dead by Daylight is really buggy, and sometimes you just can't hear people that are just on the other side of a door from you, or on the other side of a fence from you. They just, like, lose all audio. So Strider doesn't help that much with that problem, and it doesn't really help all that much in general. I'd put it into D tier. Next we have Surge. This makes it so when you down a survivor, then all generators within 32 meters of you instantly explode, pretty much acting like you kicked them, get an additional 8% regression penalty, and then this goes on cooldown for 40 seconds. Surge is pretty good. I would put this up into B tier because it can be pretty useful. It can save you some time on gens, and it makes it so people can't do gens right next to hooks that you're going to be using. Up next, we have Surveillance. Surveillance makes it so the auras of regressing generators are highlighted in yellow for you, but when somebody starts working on them, they slowly become yellow for the next 16 seconds. You can also hear repair noises a little bit easier within 8 meters of you. I'm just going to put Surveillance into C tier because it does have some use, and with certain killers and certain builds, it can be useful, but it's nothing like super crazy a lot of the time. Then we have Territorial Imperative. This makes it so you can see the auras of survivors entering the basement so long as they are 32 meters away from you, or you're 32 meters away from the basement. They're revealed for 3 seconds, and then this goes on a cooldown for 20 seconds. This one's D tier. Like, it lets you know that people are going to go down to the basement if you're far away from the basement. So by the time you get back to the basement, they might already be gone. You can use this with certain killers like Demogorgon, where you can actually teleport. You could also potentially use this with Freddy, where you can teleport. Maybe even like Nurse or Spirit or somebody that can actually move really fast, or Blight. And you have to be so far away from the basement, which in certain maps is going to be very difficult because it might be in the center of the map. So you may not ever really get to use this in certain matches. Next, we got Thanophobia. Thanophobia makes it so for every injured or dying person or person on the hook, every other survivor suffers from a 5% regression penalty, or I guess 5% penalty towards repairing, sabotaging, and cleansing, up to 20%. This can be really strong on killers that can damage a lot of people very quickly, like Legion. This one can be incredibly strong on them. But on other killers where you usually just go and insta-down people, it's not going to be as strong, but it will still help. Thanophobia is always going to be useful, so I'd probably put this one up into B tier as well. Next, we have Thrilling Tremors. Thrilling Tremors makes it so once you have downed somebody and then pick them up, then all generators that are not being worked on are blocked by the entity for the next 16 seconds. Then this goes on cooldown for 60 seconds. This one is really good if you combine it with Surge, because you can pretty much cause all the generators to then explode, you grab somebody, and then nobody can be on those generators, so then they start regressing as well. And Thrilling Tremors can be pretty useful because it gives you information as to where people are. I'd put this one up into B tier as well. Then we have Tinkerer. Tinkerer makes it so whenever a generator is at 70% completion, Tinkerer pops, giving you a loud notification, making you undetectable for the next 16 seconds, and it highlights that generator in a red glow. Tinkerer is one of the strongest perks in the game. It's so useful for telling you where to go, where survivors are, what they're doing. So I'd put this one up into S tier. Next we have Trails of Torment. Trails of Torment makes it so after kicking a generator, you are granted the undetectable status effect until that generator stops regressing or you damage another survivor by any means. But then once you kick the generator, that aura of the generator is revealed to all survivors in yellow. This then goes on a cooldown for 60 seconds. Trails of Torment is just not that great because it kind of tells people where they can go to kind of disrupt your power and what generators were being worked on. And it gives you an undetectable status effect, but only so long as you don't injure somebody or that generator doesn't start being worked on again. So it's not all that great. I'd put it into like low C tier because the undetectable status can be useful. Next we have Unnerving Presence. This makes it so all survivors within your terror radius have an increased chance of getting skill checks by 10%, but the skill check successful zone is lowered by up to 60%. This can actually help other survivors, especially if they're running something like Spine Chill along with this. You might actually be helping the survivors if they're good survivors and can keep hitting these skill checks. It's good against bad survivors where they're just not that great at hitting skill checks. This one could actually be helping good survivors though. And for the most part, it really doesn't do a whole lot since a lot of survivors just aren't going to be doing skill checks when they're inside your terror radius because you're likely chasing them. So I'd put Unnerving Presence probably into D tier. Then we have Unrelenting. Unrelenting makes it so if you miss an auto attack, then you get a slightly faster recovery. This one's pretty bad. It almost never helps you actually get any sort of real use out of it. There's only a very, very, very few instances where you swing and you screw up your attack, and then you may have just enough time to hit somebody as they're going through a window or over a pallet. Where it might count towards that. Otherwise, you would just swing and miss, and then you'd hit them with the next attack, or you just wouldn't miss with the first attack, in which case, in either of those cases, this doesn't really help. So I'd put this into D tier as well. Then we have Whispers. Whispers makes it so you get an auditory warning so long as you're within 32 meters of a survivor. This is pretty good. This actually helps you get a lot of information, especially since this is a free perk. So you can kind of echolocate where people are. And that is pretty useful. I'd put this one into B tier. And then our last perk is Zanchin Tactics. This makes it so you can see the auras of all breakable walls, pallets, and windows within 32 meters of you. This one can be useful for newer killers because you don't know the maps very well. You might not know where people are trying to take you, what structures to kind of look out for, where they might be able to get around and stuff like that. It's pretty useful for them. Once you get used to all that stuff, though, it's not as useful. Could still be on like newer maps and stuff, but other than that, I'd put it Zanchin Tactics into C tier. And this is where I would put all of the killer perks in Dead by Daylight. I've already done the survivor perks, and I've done the killers. I'll probably do the survivors at some point. Tell me what you thought of this list. If you'd like to see more of this stuff, be sure that you get subscribed, as well as be sure to click over here on this list to my other Dead by Daylight stuff. Special thanks to all the supporters of the channel. I really do appreciate that. This is my patrons over on Patreon and my members over here on YouTube. If you would like to be a part of that, there are links down in the description. You get early access to videos like this. Thanks again, everybody, and I will talk to you next time. Till then, stay cool. Bye.